No bastard ever won a war by dying for his country. He won it by making some other poor dumb bastard die for his country. Patton wasn't just a war movie, it was a cinematic battlefield where egos clashed, tempers erupted, and chaos unfolded behind the camera as violently as the battles on screen. The film won Oscars and etched George C. Scott's face into movie history. But what audiences didn't know? Cameras nearly stopped rolling over Scott's volcanic temper. A near-fatal accident struck during the tank sequences. Studio politics almost killed the film before it started. Even the Pentagon tried to bury certain truths about General Patton. This isn't just another Hollywood war story, it's 20 shocking production secrets about Patton they never wanted out. And wait until you hear the bonus fact, a secret so bizarre it almost rewrote Hollywood history. Let's march into the chaos. George C. Scott refused the Oscar. George C. Scott's performance as Patton is legendary. But in 1971, when he won the Academy Award for Best Actor, he flatly refused it. He called the Oscars a 2-hour meat parade and said no artist should compete against another. His rejection sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Studios feared his protest might spark a larger rebellion against the Academy system. Behind the scenes, producers were furious. An Oscar win was supposed to boost profits, but Scott's defiance only fueled his mystique. It wasn't just an actor walking away from a gold statue, it was a man declaring war on Hollywood tradition. And in doing so, he made the film's anti-establishment legacy even stronger. The Pentagon hated the script. The U.S. military didn't like what they read. Early drafts of the script portrayed Patton as unstable, arrogant, and dangerously obsessed with his image. Pentagon officials threatened to withhold access to tanks, troops, and equipment unless rewrites softened his flaws. Producers had to walk a fine line, enough military cooperation to make the film authentic, but not so much censorship that Patton became propaganda. In the end, the filmmakers compromised. Patton's darker side stayed in, but key political controversies were trimmed. Not a polished biography, but a battlefield of half-truths and omissions. The U.S. Army wanted a hero. Hollywood delivered a myth, and critics knew it. Francis Ford Coppola was fired from the script before The Godfather. Francis Ford Coppola was just another struggling writer. He co-wrote the Patton script, but was fired early in development for being too unconventional. His draft opened with Patton addressing an unseen army against an American flag, a sequence so bold producers nearly cut it. When the film finally used it, that speech became one of the most famous openings in cinema history. Ironically, Coppola's unfilmable scene defined the entire movie. It wasn't Hollywood polish, it was raw power. The man they fired became the man who wrote the line every viewer remembers. George C. Scott's explosive set behavior. No, Scott didn't just play Patton, he became him. Crew members recall him staying in character long after cameras stopped. He barked orders at extras as if they were real soldiers. He berated assistants for minor mistakes. In one infamous incident, Scott punched a prop wall so hard it split, terrifying the crew. Director Franklin J. Schaffner admitted he often had to roll cameras without telling Scott, capturing his most unhinged energy before the actor even realized he was being filmed. Not performance, possession. The line between man and general blurred until even the crew whispered, was Scott channeling Patton or becoming him? The infamous slapping scene was realer than you think. One of Patton's most controversial real-life moments, slapping a shell-shocked soldier, was recreated in the film. But here's what audiences didn't know. The extras cast as soldiers were real veterans. When Scott slapped the young actor, the veterans erupted with raw emotional responses. Many had lived through similar humiliation in the military. Some even cried. The set atmosphere turned so tense, the director considered cutting the scene entirely. But leaving it in preserved the film's brutal honesty. What looked like acting was part performance, part reopened wound. The ghosts of World War II were standing right there on the soundstage. The tanks nearly killed the crew. Patton's massive tank battles weren't shot with miniatures, they used real World War II armor. The problem? These machines were old, unpredictable, and dangerous. During one scene, a tank slipped its brake and almost crushed a camera crew hiding in a trench. Operators dove for their lives, leaving equipment shattered under the treads. The chaos was so intense that insurance agents nearly pulled the plug on filming. Instead, producers doubled safety staff and pressed forward. What audiences see as thrilling authenticity was, behind the scenes, a brush with death. Tanks didn't just shake the ground on film, they nearly buried the production for good. Carl Malden was miserable. Carl Malden, who played General Omar Bradley, endured a grueling shoot. Cast as the calm foil to Scott's volcanic Patton, Malden had to endure endless retakes where Scott dominated every frame. Crew members recall Malden quietly smoking between takes, muttering that his role was thankless. Worse, his military uniform weighed heavily under scorching Spanish sun where battle scenes were filmed. Malden's patience snapped once when Scott mocked his delivery. The tension between the two wasn't scripted. It simmered off camera. When critics later praised Malden for being the steady balance to Scott, insiders knew that weary authenticity was partly real exhaustion, captured forever on film. Filming in Spain nearly bankrupted the movie. To capture sprawling battlefields, the crew shot much of Patton in Spain. Franco's government provided soldiers as extras, but this cooperation came at a price. Spain charged steep fees for equipment rentals, and logistics collapsed when tanks broke down in the desert heat. The production hemorrhaged money on repairs, lodging, and emergency rewrites. At one point, the studio considered cutting entire sequences to save cash. Instead, Schaffner doubled down, using clever camera tricks to make fewer soldiers look like thousands. On screen, the battles look grand. In reality, budget panic was gnawing at every frame, not triumph, but survival. Scott's refusal to reshoot the speech. The opening flag speech is iconic, but it nearly didn't happen as audiences know it. Scott initially delivered it with the profanity-laced fury Coppola had scripted, but studio executives panicked, fearing censors would cut it. They asked Scott to redo a clean version. He refused, growling, "That's the way Patton would have said it." The compromise? They edited the original into something slightly tamer, but still shocking for 1970. It wasn't a sanitized general the world saw. It was the raw, uncompromising vision Scott demanded. His refusal cemented the film's immortal opening as one of cinema's boldest gambles. The mid-roll engagement hook. By the film's midpoint, chaos reigned, on-screen and off. Cast egos clashed, tanks misfired, and tempers exploded daily. And here's the thing, we're only halfway through the shocking truths. What comes next? Even darker secrets, accidents, politics, and betrayals that could have sunk the film entirely. So before we march forward, go ahead and like and subscribe. Because the next 10 facts, they'll change the way you ever watch Patton again. A near-fatal Jeep accident. During a convoy scene, a stunt driver lost control of a World War II-era Jeep on a narrow mountain road in Spain. The vehicle skidded, rolled, and nearly plunged into a ravine. Crew members rushed to pull the driver out, shaken but miraculously alive. Cameras weren't rolling. The scene was a rehearsal, but word spread fast across the set. The accident terrified the insurance company, which briefly considered halting all location work. Yet production marched on. For viewers, the film's military convoys looked seamless, but behind the lens, every engine roar carried the risk of disaster. That Jeep's near-death plunge became another ghost lingering over the shoot. George C. Scott's secret drinking. Scott's reputation as a heavy drinker followed him onto the set. Crew whispered about him arriving to shoots with whiskey on his breath. His intoxication sometimes fueled the volcanic energy the role demanded, but it also made him unpredictable. On one occasion, he raged so wildly after forgetting lines that Schaffner delayed filming for hours. Rather than fire him, producers leaned into the chaos, capturing that raw volatility on screen. The unsettling truth? Some of the Patton's unhinged rants weren't entirely scripted. They were Scott, fueled by alcohol, channeling something primal. Not performance, but a dangerous fusion of intoxication and genius. The slap scene sparked studio panic. When executives first saw the slapping sequence in dailies, they were horrified. They worried audiences would revolt against such a brutal portrayal of an American hero. Studio memos debated whether to cut it entirely, but director Schaffner and writer Coppola fought hard to keep it. Their argument, Patton was controversial in real life, so the film must be too. Reluctantly, the studio relented, and when audiences saw it, the moment became one of the most talked about scenes of 1970. Instead of tarnishing the film, it gave it moral weight. What the studio feared would destroy Patton became the scene that defined it. Real soldiers as extras, those sprawling battlefield shots, they weren't just actors. Franco's Spanish army supplied hundreds of real soldiers to march in uniform as extras. They were paid little, and many resented the endless retakes under blistering sun. Some deliberately messed up cues, forcing reshoots that drove Schaffner mad. Yet, their disciplined formations gave the film a realism Hollywood couldn't fake. Ironically, soldiers who once trained for war became unpaid background for Hollywood spectacle. What looks like seamless authenticity is actually weary conscripts marching for cinema instead of combat. Their footsteps echo on screen, but behind them lies resentment and fatigue. The general's family objected. Patton's descendants were deeply uncomfortable with the film. They argued it exaggerated his flaws, portraying him as egotistical and unhinged while downplaying his military brilliance. At one point, they even threatened legal action, demanding rewrites. The studio pushed back, insisting it was artistic interpretation. Ultimately, the family backed down, but their anger lingered. They refused to cooperate with promotions and later called the movie a caricature. The irony: their outrage only made the public more curious. In trying to bury the film, the family accidentally helped fuel its legendary status. Patton's legacy became Hollywood's battlefield, and his bloodline lost the fight. Scott's violent outburst on set. George C. Scott's intensity didn't stop at method acting. It sometimes boiled into violence. During one heated day of shooting, he hurled a prop helmet across the set, narrowly missing a crew member. Schaffner later admitted he feared Scott's temper could injure someone before the movie wrapped, yet producers tolerated it, convinced his volatility gave the performance its frightening authenticity. What audiences saw as Patton's fury wasn't just acting, it was Scott's own demons erupting on camera. That unpredictability electrified the role, but left the crew walking on eggshells. Not just performance, a dangerous storm bottled inside a man who refused to be contained. Editing battles behind the scenes. Post-production was almost as intense as filming. Editors clashed over how much of Patton's darker traits to reveal. Some wanted to soften him into a patriotic icon, while others fought to keep Coppola's unsparing vision intact. Heated arguments stretched into the night, with reels of film passed back and forth like weapons. Ultimately, the compromise preserved Patton's complexity, both brilliant strategist and deeply flawed human being. But insiders claim entire reels showing Patton's anti-Semitic remarks and harsher rants were cut forever. What audiences saw wasn't the full Patton. It was the version Hollywood dared to release without tearing the country apart. The ghost of Patton's own death. An eerie shadow hung over production. General George S. Patton had died in a mysterious car accident in 1945. Conspiracy theories claimed he was assassinated to silence him. Cast and crew whispered about the Patton curse, with accidents on set feeding their fears. Scott himself was unsettled, admitting in interviews that he sometimes felt Patton's presence pressing against him during filming. Extras swore strange winds rose whenever they staged Patton's deathbed scenes. Coincidence? Or something else? The sense of haunting lent the film a chilling undercurrent, as if Patton himself hovered just beyond the lens, demanding his story be told. Studio executives tried to cut the flag speech. Even after Scott refused to reshoot the famous opening, Fox executives panicked about releasing it. They argued no movie should begin with a profanity-laced tirade before audiences met a single character. Some even proposed moving it to the end. Schaffner fought back, insisting the speech was the movie. Without it, Patton's contradictions, charisma, arrogance, brutality, wouldn't be understood. Against all odds, Schaffner won. The flag speech stayed, and history proved him right. It became one of cinema's most iconic openings, copied and parodied for decades. A sequence once nearly buried became the very heartbeat of the film's legend. George C. Scott's heartbreaking prediction. Near the end of shooting, Scott reportedly told a crew member, "This film will outlive me, and Patton too." It was a chillingly accurate prophecy. Scott would die in 1999, but his Patton remains etched in American memory. The irony? He hated celebrity and despised the Academy Awards, yet this role chained him forever to history, not as himself, but as a general he once called a magnificent bastard. In predicting his own immortality, Scott spoke the film's truth. Art can trap a man in ways more permanent than war or glory. The secret CIA connection. Here's the secret no one expected. During research for Patton, the filmmakers quietly received access to classified files through back channels. Coppola later hinted that CIA contacts helped them shape the general's portrayal, particularly his paranoia about the Soviets. Why? Because in 1970, the Cold War raged, and a film about a fiery anti-Russian general risked inflaming politics. By nudging the narrative, intelligence operatives may have shaped Patton's on-screen legacy for global audiences. Not just Hollywood myth-making, but Cold War propaganda woven into cinema. The general who distrusted politicians may have been drafted into another battle, decades after death. Patton wasn't just a war epic, it was a cinematic war zone where real danger, political meddling, and human frailty collided. Behind every frame lies chaos, tanks nearly crushing men, egos colliding, governments interfering, and an actor losing himself to the ghost of a general. The result? A masterpiece born from turmoil,